It is 2 o'clock. We have started the recording of the meeting, and we will turn to the bishop to begin with prayer, please.
You're muted, Bishop.
No, he's not. Bishop, can you?
The bishop was muted. Oh, I rarely get caught on that one, but I did this time. Well, let's take it from the top again. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the end of another week for our regular Friday drop-in call. I do find Friday rolls into Friday with great regularity, and thank you for your diligence in being present here and all the work that goes on. And as I say, I never tire of giving thanks for everyone who is on these calls and for all of the work that you're doing in your parishes on behalf of the people that you're called to serve. So we begin our meeting today with prayer. Let us pray. Gracious and loving God, we give you praise and thanksgiving for the gift of a beautiful day and the week that is nearly past. We give you thanks for the work and the ministry that you entrust to us, for the care that you give to us in serving the people that you love so dearly, and for the strengthening power of your Spirit that calls us together in this mission and ministry. As we come to our meeting today and begin to discuss the phased reopening plan for our churches across the province of Ontario, but here in the Diocese of Ontario, I pray that you'll be especially here by the power of your Spirit to guide us and show us the way forward that you would have us go. We had difficult news in the last 24 hours from the city of Kingston with an outbreak of COVID-19, and we pray especially for the 18 who have tested positive so far, but as news says this afternoon, for 680 people within the city who have been traced and have been asked to self-isolate for the next 2 weeks. We ask that you'll be present with them, and especially with our healthcare workers on the front line in our hospitals, doctors and nurses, caregivers. Pray that you'll be present with them and with families who watch and wait through these days. Strengthen us now. In your holy name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, so we'll roll through it's kind of a little bit different today because what we want to do is spend time looking at that phased reopening and the document that was put up on our website, on the Pandemic Hub website, that gives you some of the small detail as we put that Loving Our Neighbors document into play. Hope you've had an opportunity to take a look at it. And so what I'll do today is I'm going to begin by, I want to share with you some of the pertinent slides from the conversations that the House of Bishops executive officers have had with medical health professionals, and particularly the epidemiologists that we have consulted. And we'll pull up some of the slides they have that they have used in those presentations to assist us in understanding where they're coming from in the advice that they're giving to us, and wanting to give us a clear sense of this particular pandemic, this particular virus, and the difficulties that it presents, not only here in our area, but around the world, and how difficult a thing it is to get a handle on, and why we have to maintain our vigilance, and what went into the decision-making that we've had within our province, and particularly within our diocese, on this phased reopening. Our hope is after today we'll have I'll look at those, but then we will take a look-see at the document itself. Alec will take you through some of that, and Wayne will also be involved in some of the guidelines from a pastoral ministry perspective. I think we're going to look at some financial pieces as well, and then throw it over to Q&A, and we want to hear your comments on this. Our hope is to be able to take this phased reopening and that small detail, and then on Monday, right now you'll see it's in draft format, and on Monday then we will be officially in the red stage, and that will move us through July and August, and then hopefully, pray God, in September we will have worked our way through to get ready to move to that next amber phase. So just in terms of looking at some of those documents, one of the things that I think had quite a an impact on us was this model that the epidemiologist presented to us. A lot of different models that have been used around the world, and they really like Japan's 3C model, the risk areas of the 3 Cs, which are closed spaces, crowded places, and close contact. And you don't have to look any farther than what happened in Kingston over the last 24 hours at the nail salon to see how the convergence, and you see in that chart, in the 1, 2, 3 area there, it's where the risk of occurrence of clusters is particularly high when those 3 Cs converge. And so you can imagine in that nail salon, you had a closed space, you had a crowded place, and close contact. And that led to that outbreak that now is bouncing around to some of the other places in the city. And just recently, as I mentioned in the prayers, Dr. Kieran Moore, they've traced 680 people at this point that they've asked to self-isolate for 14 days. I understand that the lineup at the Memorial Center for testing is stretching down and around the block. A lot of people, you can kind of get the sense of the concern. We've been very, very fortunate in our area, particularly in KFL&A, and over this whole period of time where we've had few cases. But as the medical health professionals have said, as our civic leaders say day after day after day, this is a dangerous virus, and the risk of it erupting quickly is always close at hand because we do not have a vaccine. We do not have a way of dealing with this right now. So that model is one that was particularly pertinent to our conversation amongst the House of Bishops and executive officers. So those 3 Cs, closed spaces, crowded places, close contact, and the super spreading events, persons and behaviors, and the context of those gatherings is quite important. So we go to the next slide, Alec. So the question that they put to us is, are churches at that 3C intersection? So where those 3 things correlate, and the behaviors related to COVID transmission, the traditional risk factors. We ask questions around the frequency of our meeting, the size of the groups that gather, the proximity people have one to another, our sacraments, particularly the Eucharist, and how we administer the Eucharist, and how we worship in that way, the physical movement in our buildings, the touching, the socializing, the food. And then something which at that point when they presented this to us, it was becoming more and more of an issue, was around singing and music in the service, particularly congregational singing or choral singing. And that seems to have become more and more of an issue as this has gone on. And then most importantly is the demographics of the attendees. The bulk of the population who make up our parishes, and they talk about the risk factors that are there. And I was just watching over the last hour or so the coronavirus update in the United States, and they were really, again, highlighting on those particular issues. But the problem they're facing now, over half, they have a huge spike in cases south of the border, and we certainly continue to hold our American friends in our prayers over this time as they continue to grapple with this. But now this is happening in the younger population, and they're saying that, you know, you may be asymptomatic, you may have this disease and have mild symptoms if you do have symptoms, because it doesn't seem to affect the younger population to the extent that it affects the older population, or those with the phrase that they use as comorbidity. So there could be issues like obesity, diabetes, heart disease, respiratory illness, all those other things that cut across all of the demographics. But someone could have it and transmit it to somebody else and be totally unaware that that has happened. So the susceptibility to life-threatening illnesses was a huge issue for discussion in looking at those particular things. We'll go to the next slide, Alec. This is a rating chart that has been created through this to try to get a sense of, on a scale of 1 to 10, where are the most significant risk factors in different activities. You see a whole series of them. So, for example, down at the bottom of the list, playing tennis, getting takeout from a restaurant, very low risk activity, getting fuel at the gas station, things, going for a walk, being outdoors. And remember, you go back to that 3C diagram and where that correlation of those 3 Cs comes. So when you're outdoors, it's not a confined space, so the risk factor is less. But you'll notice up there at number 8, over to one side there are churches and the activities that we undertake. So gyms, amusement parks, buffets, sports stadiums, churches, all kind of relate in there together. So that's coronavirus risk level by activity. Go to the next slide, Alec. They also, one of the issues around this COVID-19 is something I've learned, this phrase, attack rate. And one of the things that they wanted to show us was that unlike the flu, and sometimes it's well, this is like the flu. Well, it's not like the flu. The attack rate of this particular virus is much more virulent. And so they wanted to show us a few examples. Now, mind you, this is probably a couple of weeks ago. We probably could point to others that have popped up in the news recently, but these were the ones that were given to us. So as you see there in Alabama, there was a church gathering where 92 people attended and 35 infections, another 26 people infected following that, 4 deaths resulting. But the attack rate is what they wanted to highlight to us. It was a 38% attack rate of the individuals that attended that event. Frankfurt, Germany. A church gathering, 140 attendees, 107 people infected, a 76% attack rate. Within our own country in Calgary, there was a church service and post-service celebration, 41 people attending, 24 people infected, 2 deaths from that, 59% attack rate. Berlin, Germany, and this goes to the singing issue, a choir, 78 attendees, 59 people infected, 76% attack rate. Skagit County down the state, you might remember that story from a little while ago. And again, another choir of 61, 52 people infected, 2 deaths from that, 85% attack rate. And you can point to multiple issues in the news. I think one that just popped up was a surprise birthday party in Texas where a family gathered for a surprise party and 18 people infected as a result of that from one person attending that who had the coronavirus. And now the father in that family is fighting for his life in hospital. So again, that's what the epidemiologists wanted us to really focus on, was the risk factors involved and the attack rate of this particular virus. So that's another slide of the many slides that we saw in the presentations that we heard that certainly had impact upon me and those who were on that call. So go to the next slide, Alec. So this is another, like the advice from the epidemiologists, these are considerations as we begin to plan for the fall of 2020. And one of the things that they talked to us about was the issue of risk, because all of the choices that we make and everything that we're doing, and the difficulty of this, and this is when I made the comment on the call, that this feels to me like a game, and I've used this image with you before. It feels like a game of pickup sticks, and you're trying to figure out what stick to pull out next. And one of the doctors said yes, and he said the structure doesn't fall for 2 weeks. So it becomes a real challenging thing to figure out what to do moving forward safely and making choices, because all of the choices we make create or modify the risk factors involved with this. And after all of our practices and modifications and changes, what they wanted us to know is that there's always going to be risk present. We can do all of the things, washing, masks, physical distancing, all of the things that go with that, there still will be risk present. So the question that we have to grapple with, and this is not only within the church, this is within our communities, and as the province has been going through its reopening plan, and we rejoice in the fact that the number today, I think, is just continuing to drop across the province. So I hope what happened in Kingston is just an anomalous blip, and they can get their handle on that right away. I know there was a news article in the WIG today. I don't know. I think it was, it was Global News, that was talking, interviewing wait staff at the patio restaurants who were remarking about the number of out-of-town visitors there were. Well, I'd heard about that a week ago in talking to people that I know that work in that industry. And they have to do the contact tracing. They have to know where people are from that they're serving. And there were a lot of people coming here from out of town. And it was causing them a great deal of concern. But the question that we've had to grapple with in our communities is, what risk tolerance are we willing to bear? So the willingness of an organization to accept or reject a given level of risk. And so what the epidemiologists were doing for us very specifically as leaders in in church communities is to look at the level of risk with our context, our demographic, the way this disease functions, and the decisions that we have to take. So then this underlying piece, when residual risk exceeds the organization's risk tolerance, additional risk mitigation activities may be warranted. So as we move through this, that's kind of a fancy way of saying that we'll start our red phase. Our prayer is that we'll move towards that amber phase over the course of the summer. By September, we're going to know so much more around what's happening in our province, in our communities, what's happening with that second wave, because everything we're reading right now from people who know the issue is saying that the second wave is not an if, it's going to be happen. And the question that's difficult is that the second wave will begin before the first wave is over. So it's very, very complicated. So we need to have nimbleness through this. It's another phrase that we use a lot in terms of how we're constructing these step-by-step documents and the phase plan that we've put in place, is to make sure that we're nimble, that we have to increase risk mitigation, that we can do that. And my hope is that as we move towards that, taking this again, and I'll admit this straight up front, I am taking a very conservative approach to this because I want to err on the side of abundant caution. And I don't want to make a decision. As I've said in the office a few times on our virtual office meetings, I'd rather the worst thing that happens in all of this is that in September, October, somebody says, look, I told you so. It wasn't as bad as you thought it was. And I can handle that. What I can't handle is making a decision and doing the wrong thing and having something happen like what we're seeing happen in the city of Kingston right now. So for the sake of 2 months and what we're called to do and taking that, I think, step by step, measured, this is what I believe the risk tolerance is for the people in the Diocese of Ontario. We will get to September, and my prayer is we'll be able to move into the amber phase and continue on. I think one of the ironies of this is the fact that we have been doing so well across most of Eastern Ontario that there's this, and we can understand how people feel. They want to get out, they want to get involved, they want to get engaged, and especially in the life of the church, we want to get back to our activities. We want to gather together. We are so relational, and there's such a difference between being gathered and being connected. Right now, all of us are connected, but we certainly are not gathered. I'm sitting in my den with a half-cold cup of coffee, waiting for a Reliance furnace repair to come to service my furnace. I am not gathered with my friends on this call. I'm connected to them. So we yearn for that. And all of the things that are happening, families wanting to gather, and all of those sorts of things. So I do understand that, but, and I've had some conversation and some correspondence back and forth with folks about this. But I was rock set firm on the decision that we've taken before the last 48 hours. I am the immovable object right now on it. And so that's where we will proceed. And I look forward to hearing your comments as we move forward on this. But I just wanted to give you those slides that came to us from the epidemiologists of many slides they presented and much conversation. But those were the ones that I pulled out that really spoke to me, and I wanted to share with you. So you know a little bit about what went into this decision that's being made on behalf of the Diocese of Ontario as we move into this red zone. So with that, I'll turn it over to Alec, and he'll begin to move you through some of those details.
Thank you, Bishop. This is just a bit of a recap on what we talked about last week. That the process we have followed, where the House of Bishops working through, the executive officers engaging with the bishops, and then everybody engaging with the epidemiologists. You've seen some pieces out of that. The bishops then put out on the 17th of June, the 3-stage, the red, amber, and green, which is a common framework across the ecclesiastical province. And as we said, we would begin with the move to the red stage in this diocese on Monday, based upon the the work that we're about to talk about. So the red stage, just as to recall, we continue to be to no corporate worship. We continue to be from a worship and that perspective, not making use of our buildings. They remain closed. Small weddings, funerals, and emergency baptisms will be permitted. And Wayne will talk a little more about that. Pastoral care, we can have to have one-on-one. And let me speak to that. Offices can reopen where the circumstances permit it. Small meetings can occur again where the conditions can permit it, but we continue to use online as the first choice. Vital food ministry, again, under the right conditions. And again, we'll talk some more about the details around each of these. The red stage for us, we intend to begin on Monday. Today's meeting, those guidelines that were on the link off the hub that you saw in your invitation to this meeting, those continue to be draft. What we wanted to do is talk through them today, and based on any questions or comments that come up, we may make some changes if appropriate, and then over the weekend, those will go into the finals to become version 1. It's anticipated, if all continues to hold, that we would move in September at the earliest into the amber phase, which would see our buildings reopen for worship, and then the green stage, which would be, we've sort of loosely called the new normal. Really can't be sure when that would happen. And the other key message here is that as we now enter the red phase, and we anticipate we'll stay there for July and August, unless we have to roll back, that we begin the work to plan for the amber phase. And that's about developing the plan. So as we mentioned, a group being put together to build the guidelines, tools, and the training that will then let each church make its specific plan, which will then be approved and permit the churches to start to reopen in September. And again, each church will make its own decision after we move into the amber phase on how fast they go, what point they go, and what other controls and things they need to put into place. So that work is going to happen over the summertime, and you'll continue to hear that. But our intention is on Monday we can move to the red phase. So in that red phase, hopefully everybody has from the website a copy of the draft document, the ministry, pastoral care, worship, and building guidelines for the safe reopening of the Diocese of Ontario church buildings. So I'm now going to turn over to Wayne, who's going to speak to the ministry, pastoral, and worship guidelines, and then I'll come back to speak about the building guidelines. What are you, Wayne? Wayne, are you there? I'm checking to see. You just stop the slide share for a moment and see. I'm not sure if I see Wayne.
Wayne's there and his microphone's green, but there's no sound.
He's not muted. Let me mute him and unmute him just to see what happens. Today seems to be the day for glitches. So I've muted him, now I've unmuted him. Wayne, could you speak again? Yeah, well, Wayne, let me maybe suggest you drop off and pop back on. What we'll do is I will cover I'll move to the building ones, and then we'll come back to the pastoral, ministerial, and worship ones. Hopefully Wayne can rejoin. So the building specifics are really focused in a couple of areas. One of them is around church offices. And again, it's important to remember that church offices where there is staff, that the wardens, being the corporation, are the employer. And so when we go to consider reopening for employees, that brings a whole nother piece. That brings the piece around labor and around building safety and the responsibility for a safe work environment. So what is in the document around the offices, you will find in terms of cleaning and sanitation, and whether that is the obvious things like doorknobs and common touch areas, whether that is things like the photocopy or the printer, whether that is things like putting a screen in place for say at a reception position, that the office reopening allows the internal work to start to happen. We're still staying in a state where the office is closed externally other than by appointment. So that's not saying you're just drop into your office, but it says that, for example, the staff in the office can now come in, do their work, and if someone needs to see them, can make an appointment to do so. It also means that small meetings, for example, wardens, etc., those meetings can be held face-to-face. It is still recommended to do them online wherever possible, again, to mitigate, but where absolutely essential, those meetings can now start to occur. It means that for the clergy, that again, while it's preferred that pastoral care, obviously the safest environment is outside. It's not always the most confidential environment, but whether that's a pastoral visit or a visit in, those things are possible. Again, assuming that the church and the wardens have agreed that the correct steps are in place. And there's a set of checklists around the building. One of the things that's attached is a series of checklists. You'll see them there for outdoor weddings, for funerals, etc. Wayne will speak to those, but there is a package around the use of the building for whether that is by the staff, whether that is by, if you have a lease in place. And again, the difference between a lease and a rental group, where you have a lease is where you have a signed agreement, and that group becomes responsible. So there's a series of things there that that give you checklists. In the appendix, it talks about sanitation and disinfecting, because people will look at it and say, well, we clean, but there's specific now sets of requirements and responsibilities that say cleaning isn't enough, that it now needs to be disinfected. And what does that mean? And that means a variety of different things. It means that, wiping it off, for example, isn't just something you can do once a day. Washrooms that are shared, those need to be cleaned on a regular basis. If you have a stairway or an elevator that would cause a constriction for people, you need to take steps to ensure that you don't have people coming down together through that stairwell or that elevator. I know most of our buildings, we have a few, but elevators that, again, put things in place. It says that, you need to deal with anything where you have a kitchen or a lunchroom, or somewhere your staff in the building would be using. And again, I know that's a lot of churches, that's not an issue, because in a lot of churches there isn't even an office. But where the administration and start reusing the space, the coverage for when groups can start to reuse the space, and for food ministries and the steps that can be taken there. And so there are both the guidelines, which are listed in the first few pages, and then behind that, there are a number of checklists that give you detail around each one. So Wayne, are you now able to speak and be heard? I'm sure you were speaking. Are you able to be heard? Nope. I can see the Wayne's. Have you checked in your settings what microphone you're using? Okay. So let me basically give you the highlights then of the changes that are happening on the pastoral ministerial ones. So as we mentioned, one-on-one pastoral ministry can now resume. Again, it's preferred to mitigate risk. If possible, that's done outside. That can be done on a front step or in the backyard. Where it needs to be, there needs to be steps taken to protect both those being pastored to and the pastor. If it's in an institution, of course, you're governed by the rules of that institution. The final thing after that is there are guidelines that say, of course, you're going to make sure before you go in, you wash your hands, that when you leave, you wash your hands, that you do a checklist that says, I'm not, neither I or the person that I'm pastoring have any symptoms. So all the pieces that need to be put in place to protect both the pastor and the person that is receiving the pastoral work. It does then expand to say where Bible studies and groups, again, the recommendation is that they can happen online wherever possible, but outdoor gatherings of up to 10 people, and 10 becomes the magic number for most things here, can now occur. So properly distanced, outside, and we've referred to those broadly as formation or fellowship groups, prayer groups, confirmation classes, or children and youth activities. Those can continue online, but where required, those can happen in small groups with the right protections in place. Again, meal programs and food banks, I know a number of them have continued, and again, the requirement there being to be within both the provincial guidelines and the local health unit guidelines. Worship continues to be online from a primary first choice. We are not doing worship inside our buildings other than where you're recording or live streaming. However, there is now the possibility to have outdoor worship with people in attendance up to a gathering of 10 people. And of course, that continues not to be a Eucharistic, that continues to be a service of the word. If done at the church, you can't use the church for washrooms, etc. But there can be outdoor services up to 10 people, again, with distancing, etc. And there's checklists around that. Similarly, with pastoral offices, weddings and funerals, the number remains at 10. Baptisms in an emergency state can be done with the approval of the bishop. Weddings now can occur outside, again, a service of the word, and there can be no reception at the church or on the property. Funerals continue to be outside and governed by the bereavement authority's regulations. And again, reminding all that from a pastoral perspective that public gatherings, when COVID-19 restrictions have been lifted, there can be receptions, celebration of life, etc. that can then occur. Again, checklists are there and online. Live streaming, of course, continues to be, or recorded liturgy becomes our primary offering of worship. Trying to now with around singing, the accepted guideline that's recommended is if there are singers, that we maintain 12 feet. And that seems to be the recommendation that's coming through as a best practice. So that's what we've put in place, is where there are singers that there's a minimum of 12 feet, which is the 6 foot doubled. And again, that there can be more than 5 people involved in the liturgy, but no more than 5 in the building at one time. And making sure that when in between people there is proper sanitation that occurs. And of course, the alternatives for home prayer continue to be there in the document. So the last, from page 5 on, page 6 on, there are checklists. Checklists for offices, and as I mentioned, for the services outdoors, etc. And those are to give you clarity on the requirements, but also to give you a structure to work through in terms of what needs to be factored in and taken care of. I've seen Wayne leave, and I've seen Wayne come back.
I'm actually on the line. I've got a telephone. It's the old days. It's working well.
Well, we can hear you now, my friend.
Well, that's the way we prefer it, isn't it? You don't want to see me.
So I did the best I could covering those. Would turn back to you to add any more detail or color.
Well, thank you, Alec, and friends. It's great being with you. It's a privilege to speak with you about our guidelines. I'm sure Alec has hit all of the highlights, or maybe questions and answers, but let me just say a few things. You have before you a lengthier, more detailed and comprehensive set of guidelines that reiterate our diocesan strategy about being very cautious and conservative in offering ministry, pastoral care, and worship while maintaining maximum health and safety. The guidelines are consistent with those of other dioceses in our ecclesiastical province, and in particular, those of the Diocese of Huron, Toronto, and Niagara. The guidelines make possible in-person, one-on-one visits, preferably outdoors if at all possible, and regardless maintaining physical distancing and hygiene. We maintain online connections as much as possible as the preference for the purpose of visits, education, fellowship, and stewardship. You will see in them that we actually make allowance for small gatherings for outdoor worship, funerals, and weddings with no more than 10 people. And yet, as Alec just said, we continue to prefer online, taped, or live-streamed worship. Finally, you see an extensive checklist that address a number of areas of opening offices, making preparations, conducting pastoral offices, and permitting access to our buildings by outside groups. Earlier today, I watched an interview with the Chief of Staff of a Toronto hospital who put some of this in context, I think, for us here too, by saying that we live in the early days of the pandemic, and therefore we may find ourselves taking a step or two forward, followed by one or two back. Regardless, let's continue to pray for the health, the safety, and the wholeness of our people today and in the weeks and months to come. Thanks, Alec. That's it for me for now.
Great. Thanks, Wayne. Before we jump to Q&A, I just want to quickly cover one other area. And let me just go back to sharing my screen here. There we go. So one of the things that we've talked about a number of times, and I'm going to kind of reinforce this, but is that we are about to do the quarterly payments for the investment fund. And I'm sure given the revenue, the income situation in churches, everybody's counting on that money. And the money is there. We last time went to direct deposits for most that we could, and that's what we will do again this time. So for clarity, on June the 30th, the direct, which is Tuesday, the direct deposits, Joyce will trigger those direct deposits, and the bank, depending on the bank transfers and things going between banks, that should happen within a banking day. And you will also receive now from the system an email with the same information that you got on the check stub. We're trying to improve the statement stuff when we get a new package of software, but for now, you'll get an email with the same information you had on your check stub. For those that we don't have banking for, on Tuesday, the checks will get printed. We also now need to get them signed. And of course, we're only one in the office at a time. So it's going to take us a couple of days, and we have the holiday Monday or Wednesday in between. So by the time that those checks get signed and get into an envelope, run through the postage machine and into the mail, it'll be Friday or possibly Monday before they physically go into the mail. After that, it's a matter of what time, and of course, often risk with Canada Post. It seems that every quarter we have a check or two goes astray somewhere. So what we're asking is just to reinforce again, whether it's for investment fund or a trust fund, which is the cemeteries, that if you don't already have that info, or if you got a check in the last quarter and you've not already done so, by the end of business today, please get your banking info to Joyce and the email of where we send notice to, because That means you will get your money faster and surer next week. Second thing is just an update on CEWS. We had talked last week, and when we scrubbed the data, and I mean we went through the detail of each church's submission, we did not qualify for May. In fact, our churches, we were in total down 7% for May, well below the 30% threshold. We had hoped to be able to back in using April, but when we scrubbed the data for April, we discovered that we fell a little short. So we will not be receiving CEWS payment for period 3. So your June payroll statements will be the normal statements amounts. We will again in early July, so the end of next week or probably the following week, we will ask you for, the end of next week, we will ask you for the same information for July that we gathered for June, sorry, that we gathered for in the previous months. Depending on what the June results look like, we may then be able to apply for June, which would then automatically qualify us for July. And in August, we will again request data for July, and in September for August, each month, so that we can look and see if we can qualify, and if so, if we can back it up. Final thing quickly is that we've mentioned a couple of times the group that was put together, the financial response team. That team took its work and a recommendation to Synod Council, which was held Tuesday night. And from that, there was a proposal accepted. So there was a motion at council to accept it. There is now a program which will go into place for Q3, which is July, August, September. And next Friday's meeting, we will walk through that, that program and how it's been put together and how it's going to work. And that'll be the focus for next week's meeting. The other thing which I'll just mention quickly that Synod Council considered is the situation regarding Synod. We would normally have a Synod at the end of October. That was the planned time. Because of the fact that we are extremely doubtful that you'll be able to gather a couple of hundred people, because we can't do the work now in terms of getting regional meetings and all the things that have to happen before Synod, and based upon the province having emergency situation in place, the decision was made at Synod Council that we will defer Synod. We will postpone it until next spring, when we have the expectation that we will be able to gather, that we'll be able to have every parish represented, and that it's safe for us to do so, and that it won't be a significant risk, and also to protect us from the financial loss if we tried to go ahead and we weren't able to. So Synod Council voted and approved that. Synod Council acts as the synod between synods, and then Synod Council will remain in place until there's regional meetings and another synod held. Synod Council will remain in place and continue to provide governance for the diocese. So with that, let me turn back then to questions and answers. So as always, you have the opportunity, you can ask questions via by voice. You can also enter them via the chat tool, which Laura is online, and Laura will ask the questions on behalf, and we'll open for questions.
Alex, George Vale.
Good afternoon, George.
I have a question you or the bishop can answer. In September, my understanding is when we are allowed to go back, it's 30% of what your church would hold. Is that correct?
Well, it would be up to 30% based on today's guidelines. We don't know what it's going to look like in September.
Yeah, right. But here's my question. Our church will hold 80 people. That's the church. I don't know, Alec, you've been in the church and the bishop sure has. Well, our church will open up completely, and then the hall kind of, in a sense, becomes part of the church. Are we allowed to use that hall too as for the church?
Sorry, go ahead, Bishop.
No, this is one of the questions that's come up a number of times. That 30% number is one that's causing a lot of headaches. Number one for the epidemiologists, because it doesn't jive with anything else that the government has been dealing with in terms of the opening strategy. The other part of it is, and I know Wayne's been on the Bereavement Authority of Ontario calls, and this 30% has caused a lot of bile churn with that one. The question is, they're kind of looking at 30% of what the fire marshal says your building can hold. The question comes up, and if you have an opportunity to look at Archdeacon Bill Clark did an interview with Cable 10 in Kingston on this, and I think he put it very, very well. And he said the questions are, is it 30% of your worship space, 30% of your entire building? If you have a hall, and how do you calculate this? Then you have to add on top of that the physical distancing requirements. And I may have mentioned on this call last week, I know, and I did in one of the meetings I was in, a friend of mine in New Brunswick who was speaking to a colleague who has a church that has a capacity of 700. When they did the 6-foot distancing regulation, because of the way that building was laid out, they could only legally fit 49 people in the building. So even with this right now, there's a lot of unanswered questions. And as Alec has pointed out, when we get to September, we may be in a whole different situation because this thing changes so regularly. But hopefully, as we get there, we'll know if we're ready to go back in exactly what we're dealing with, so that we can do it safely.
Thank you very much, Bishop and Alex.
Thank you, George.
The bishop is always pointing out, reminding us that we're not like Tim Hortons or McDonald's that have kind of standard layouts.
And, yeah, everyone is
Every
different.
one of our church is different, and literally, you know, if what you need to when you get there, you'll be doing is sort of taking a 6-foot 2x4 and sort of waving it around, you know, turning around in a complete circle, and taping out where that circle would be. And there's been church meetings where I've wanted to take a 2x4 and wave it around, but that's different. But as you work your way around, that's the space, and you may find that. But George, that'll be consideration that you're going to need to work through, and that'll come in later in August.
Okay, thank you very much.
Laura, have you got some questions?
Hi.
Sorry, go ahead.
Dale Redding from Sterling. I wasn't able to be on last week because we're having a lot of issues with ExploreNet. We've been down for a week, and I just got on late for this one. At any rate, the documentation around the sanitation and all that, will that be on the information when you put this meeting's video up? Like, where's that information? Is it there right now?
It is
somewhere?
there. It went up yesterday. You'll find a document called Ministry, Pastoral Care, Worship, and Building Guidelines for the Safe Reopening of Diocese of Ontario Church Buildings. That set of guidelines is on the hub yesterday. You can find it from the link for this meeting, the invitation that went out to this meeting, and the document is there. There's the guidelines, and then behind it, there's 5 pages of guidelines, and then there's about 13 pages or something or 10 or 11 pages of checklists.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you. I thought that so, but again, as I said, I've been off all week because of the internet, so I'll check that out. Thank you.
Laura, we got some questions on the chat.
Yes, I have what looks like a 4-part question regarding medical supplies. So the first part is that there's a recommendation for buildings for the congregations to review their medical protocols, whether that be fire and or medical, to make amendments as required. And first aid kits may need to be upgraded to include more gloves, face shields, and one-way CPR valves. There was a question following up on that. Is there a preferred source for face masks, gloves, and hand sanitizer?
So there's a couple of ways. One of the things, as we start to get into more requirement, we will look for where we can get, because it'll vary. You know, ideally you want to be able to get them locally. So the source in Brockville will be different than the source in Belleville. The source in Kingston will be different than Picton. So there will, what we want to be able to do, working with the groups out there, is to look at what what is available locally and where.
And there was a comment from Robin Jones who said that she will send Alex the list that the municipalities use in Leeds and Grenville. So that would be good to post once we receive that. And then for those who have access to the chat, Trish Miller did post a link and it's a recent update from Kingston that masks are now mandatory in indoor public venues. So that is worth a read.
As we say, this is a moving, constantly evolving space. And again, we'll try and put all these links up on the website so that you on the hub, so you have access to them.
And another question, there is a limit of 5 for staff and meetings, but limit of 10 for other users groups, such as like the 12-step programs. Why the difference?
For internal meetings, again, the focus trying to reduce risk, looking at the size of the room, and again, when we're talking about, this is really focused around wardens and treasurer and that kind of space. So again, recognizing that most of these times it's smaller spaces, the number was kept at 5. If there's a major issue with that someone identifies, we can look at whether that could be expanded to 10.
Next question, not in keeping with the bishop's ultra cautious approach to reopening our buildings in the red stage, I noticed that the taking of temperature is not on the checklist. Why is that?
So one of the things we're still trying to work through, and we're going to look with our health professionals as we approach the next stages, there are matters of privacy when you come into asking someone, and if you're going to check temperatures coming into, for example, into a room or into a building, you also have to respect people's privacy. You can stand and go click, but what you do and how you do it, and how you safely do it and how you protect their rights is one of the things we do not yet have. What is clarity? So is that a practice to ask you, do you have a temperature? Yes, but and that is one that at this point we're not comfortable giving you the protocol for taking someone's temp.
Next question is, there is no mention of testing in the draft protocols. Will this be a requirement for people who are symptomatic or exposed to others who have COVID-19 before they can return to shared workplaces?
So again, in one of the recommendations that comes around the workplace, right, which is different than a meeting space where you have employees, you can then say that if you have been exposed or if you've in fact tested positive, you need to be tested. It is, however, asking people, and I know several people that have been through the testing, it is not the most comfortable of things to do. And so for some people, you have a choice of whether, if you don't wish to go and get a test, then you don't come back into that workspace. Those are options that people have, but at this point, we are not placing a requirement for that because it creates a different set of challenge.
Alex, can you please clarify in the red stage the guidelines for church outside property?
So the property around the church can be used for, as we've talked about, for worship. The property around the church can be used for a wedding, for a meeting, for prayer, etc. Again, with the proviso that physical distancing and sanitation are factored in. So, and again, there's no food or beverages to be served. And for clarity, again, that says it's okay, for example, for you to bring your own coffee, but it's not okay to have coffee out for people to, because in doing so, you would then have to handle things and create, and although food is not being considered a high risk one, it is one that at this point says it's safest not to go there. Outdoor services, there are things in there like you're not using prayer books, hymn books. You would need to be using bulletins that people would pick up off of a table, not be handed. And again, you would have the normal things around safety in a space that says, you know, you're not on a traffic throughway, you're, you know, not sitting on a sidewalk, public property, those kinds of things.
This actually came up because of fundraising. And so when I was just looking at the guidelines, it just sort of hit me that it says church buildings are closed to the public, but perhaps we should include church property as well.
Well, with
or anything organized, I guess, or
in terms of, I guess the question is, if you still want to be able to do worship, that's kind of why we didn't completely say that church property is closed as well, because there are a number of things there that you can do. You can have people in for a wedding. You can have people in for Bible study on the property.
But that's still sort of an organized event. I guess this, and I'm just wondering if we were allowed to have 50 people, you know, sometime in the near future, which I certainly hope will not happen. But would that change the guideline for those of us in the red stage, or I assume they would stay the same?
So the guidelines will change based on a couple of things. As the province mandates things, obviously the guidelines will change within those. I think the second thing is we will learn, as we did, I think Wayne can correct me, but I think we were on version 8 or version 9 of the previous set of guidelines. So we know that they evolve based upon experience. We know they evolve based upon practice and need. So I would anticipate they'll change, but you know, at this point, we did give consideration to 50, which is a legal maximum, and nowhere was it felt that we wanted to go, that made a risk sense to go, and that's why the number's 10.
Alec, if I can just add to that, one of the reasons, apart from being cautious that we don't want any part of the number of 50, is again, we have about 50 cemeteries in our diocese. And not every funeral involves funeral directors or a funeral home. The guideline from the BAO is that there must be one staff or volunteer person for every 10 people on the property, and that may be unwieldy for a number of our parishes trying to respect that. But also, and more important than that, in my opinion, is the more people we have on the property, the greater the risk of transmission. Having said that, the door is opened a bit to carefully, respectfully, and maintaining all protocols, have some gatherings of folk of up to 10 people.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wendy Kwiatkowski from St. Thomas. Just clarifying, any meeting, indoor or out, would we still be required to keep an attendance list with contact information?
Yes.
Yes.
Trace information. By the way, I'll mention this. Everybody, I'm sure most people on this call have either an iPhone, iOS-driven device, or a Android-driven device. If you look, and I'm an Apple guy, and so I can't tell you exactly where it is on the Androids, but if you go to your iPhone and you look at privacy, under your settings, you look at privacy, and then you look at health, you will find that Apple has downloaded to your iPhone a piece of the operating system that will keep track of contacts. Whatever your device comes within range of someone else. So Google has done the same with Android, whether you've got a Samsung or whatever you've got. they will not be, the data is not usable to anything until an app is downloaded. But those things are put in the operating system for traceability. And the intention that the government's going to is that I think in July, they will sponsor an app going out, and you'll be able to know that I passed somebody in the grocery store that turned out was tested positive. And that trace information, whether it was me or someone else, just you can, if you don't believe how serious that is, take a look at your device and look at your in your settings. That's been automatically updated, whether you knew it or not. Once the app's in place, the information can be used. So traceability is very important. That's going to be one of the things as we get to church, is how we actually, do that tracing. Again, respecting privacy for people and working your way through. Laura, do we have any?
Yes, there was a question for Joyce, who has already responded to it regarding checks. For checks that were sent into the diocese in June for May's payroll payment with a credit, is this to be corrected in July's payment? And Joyce's response is payroll invoices will be issued early July for the June payroll, excluding CEWS, along with the monthly statement. The May payroll included April's credit. So for any more questions about your payments or your checks that had been sent into the office already, your best bet is to contact Joyce directly.
And of course, each month the statement will reflect both what was charged and what you've paid or credited.
Alex, there's a question regarding the technology matching grant.
Okay.
How will applicants receive the fund for approved applications?
So we're just finalizing the first round of them, but that will be done hopefully by direct deposit rather than a check. But if we need to, we'll do it by check. But that unlike some of the other things, will be done with a cash payment, a funds payment, not a credit to your account. And the other question I was asked, which is, will that be CMM-able? And my answer is probably not on that for the technology grant. I would think not, but I don't until we pass through all of this, can't say for sure.
Alex, can you just give me the dates for the technology grant? What was the cutoff date? Or is there a cutoff date?
Nope, there is not. We're doing them by round. We've gathered something. We've just marked and we've just worked through the first group of them, and next week we'll inform against those. But we'll every week, every 2 weeks, as we get more, we will consider them.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm looking at the time, and we've gone a little bit past our hour, but again, a lot of content today. One last call for questions.
Yeah, Dale Redding again. A while back, Nancy asked the question, Ken and Nancy asked the question about doing parking lot service. And at that time we were told no. Now you're saying there's 10 people. So if we had them in their car in the parking lot, that would even be further away. Is that possible now or still a no?
To speak to that, I looked at some guidelines of one of our dioceses, and as you know, everyone is kind of in the small detail. Each diocese is doing a different thing, and you're in a car. It's July and August. You have to be in it with the windows rolled up. You can't be running your motor, which means you're not running your air conditioner. These drive-in services were designed for churches that have FM channels and who do this on a regular basis. And you can have an outdoor service with up to 10 people. I don't know. July and August, it's I can't see, they send the bylaw enforcement officer. You're at the parking lot and there's a dog in the car. I can't imagine sitting in a parking lot for a church service for half an hour with no air conditioning and the windows rolled up and no sound system. I mean, I don't know how that's going to work, but you can have a gathering outdoors with no cars, up to 10 people physically distanced. I think that provides us an opportunity to get under some trees and in some shade if we have that in our properties. But I would strongly discourage the drive-in service. And on the calls that I've had with the bishops, I can't get my head around how that would work in any way that's even safe, let alone an enjoyable worship experience.
Thank you, because I know that question will be asked again of certain.
Telling the bishop strong encourages it. I can't see it. My air conditioner is broken in my Volvo, and I have to go with all 4 windows down and the water pouring off me. Anyway, no. But under a tree out in the church property, we used to, when I was rector of St. Peter's Collins Bay, we used to have our Pentecost service out at the farm, and we had a lot of fun at that. And I mean, it's something like that, for example, where you could be out in the yard. Everyone used to be gathered. We were sort of all physically distant anyway, because everyone get different places where we'd have our picnic afterwards, and you have an opportunity to do that. That's actually a wonderful worship experience and then a lot of fun. But of course, in this situation, you can't have food and there's no washrooms. That's the other part of it. It's complicated. I think what we're doing most of all is we're just saying we've got 2 more months that we can see an end at the tunnel, and I'm hoping that's where we're at come September. And so we've plowed through since March. Let's plow through 2 more months and we'll get there, and we'll get there together.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. As I mentioned, next week we will be covering the financial support package, as well as any updates, et cetera, that come out. The document that we've been discussing, the draft will come off of that, along with any other tidying up we do in it over the next couple of days, and we will move on Monday into the red phase. Well, Bishop, back to you for closing prayer.
Thank you very much. And again, thank you everyone for all your work and your diligence and your care, your questions and your comments today, and look forward to the next steps with you together. So let us pray as we wind up our day together. Gracious God, we give you thanks for this discussion that we've had, for the issues that we've dealt with, but especially for your presence with us by the power of your Spirit. You are constantly with us, no matter the situation or the circumstance. Whether we are in crowds of thousands or alone, you are present with us by your Spirit, and we draw so deeply from that well of living water through these days. Be with those who are in leadership and among those whom we serve. Keep us safe. Pray for our healthcare workers, and be with us until we meet again. In Jesus' holy name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, everyone. Blessings, and have a wonderful weekend and a wonderful Canada Day. That's